Hello there, and welcome back to Debate Hub. I am Chesh, your master debater, and I am here with now Dr. Maddie. First off, congratulations.
Thank you.
Good for
I like
you.
being Dr. Maddie. It feels good.
Why don't you tell the good people out there, what are you a doctor of?
I am a doctor of meteorology, actually. So I got my PhD in meteorology from the University of Oklahoma this past May, just May 2024. I did my master's there as well. I finished with my master's in 2019. And my dissertation was on Arctic sea ice and how it is influenced by the atmosphere. Um, and oh, what else about me? I did my undergrad at MIT. I double majored in math and Earth atmospheric and planetary sciences. And then I ran off and joined the Navy. I taught nuclear physics to the Navy for 4 years. Honestly, because submarines weren't open to women until the year after I joined the Navy. um, and
Oh
so
no.
I wanted to do nuclear
Figures.
Navy stuff. And I was like, well, I can't be a submarine officer. Guess I'll be an instructor. And so I taught for 4 years and then got out and went to grad school. And now it's now. Now I'm a postdoc researcher, postdoctoral research assistant at OU doing boundary layer meteorology, which is more mathy than what I did before, and
So
is
you've been you're a veteran. You
yeah,
have studied a shitload. You have got a
yeah,
doctorate. You've done some traveling. You've been around, is what you're telling
yeah,
me.
yeah. I have a weirdly broad background in the physical sciences. Right?
Yeah,
It's not, which is nice. I like it. I like being a little of a jack of all trades in the physical sciences. Um, but that
right.
is uncommon. Most people really specialize and hone in right there in undergrad. And like I did not do that. I was like, I like everything.
How dare you
How
suggest?
dare I like things?
So, I think when people think of
Yeah,
meteorology, they think of like the weatherman on the news.
they
But
sure
that is
do.
not exactly what you're doing.
That's not what I'm doing at all. Listen, I just got to talk to a classroom of fifth graders about what like careers in meteorology. And the first question I got was, do you study meteors? And I was like, I'm so sorry, I don't. And then the second
Oh,
question I got
that's
was,
so
when
cute.
scientists find dinosaurs in the ground, how do they know what their name was? Um, and I was like, also not my field, friend,
Well,
but
they get them tattooed on their bones.
yeah, yeah. That's
This
you're
is
looking
why
for a
I can't be a
paleontologist.
teacher and why I'm never invited anywhere because I would lie.
Yeah.
I would just
Um,
bullshit.
listen, I thought that was a great question, and I was like, I think dinosaurs are really cool too, buddy. Um, um, but okay,
That's a great question.
yeah, yeah. And so I just told him, like, ooh, paleontologists, that's a different field, but the first person to find that dinosaur, they get to name them.
I
That's the
like the
answer.
association between meteorology to meteors to dinosaurs. Like that's like
Dinosaurs.
I see
Yeah,
the chain. I
I see the
follows.
chain.
It makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. Do you
So
sorry. Go on.
I was gonna say meteorology, you can think of it basically as three main arms of what that is. The one most people are most familiar with is broadcast meteorology. So that is those folks usually have a bachelor's degree or even a bachelor's and a master's in meteorology. But their big focus is on, hey, how do I communicate what's going on in the weather to the folks at home, both for your day to day and then also like in an emergency situation. That's a big concern of mine. I live in a state where my weather tries to kill me all the time. That's why
Yeah.
that's why there's a really good meteorology program in Oklahoma, right?
And there's a
Um,
lot of climate stuff, meteorology included, that is very, very important to the
yes,
world and politics in general, not just your day-to-day life.
absolutely.
For example, the last time the Conservative Party was in power in Canada, these motherfuckers decided to just yeet all of the fucking climate data. They were just like, weather data? We don't need that. And just threw it away.
Great.
Threw it away. Just
Love
tossed it
that.
like it
Oh
was
my
nothing,
gosh.
and it was not a good time. It hasn't been a good
That's
time. Bad day.
Yeah, yeah, listen, it's also a bad day down here for NOAA employees because that's a federal branch. Okay, listen, whatever your politics are,
Yes.
right? Um, NOAA, which is our National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, that's the federal entity that's over the National Weather Service,
Yes.
which is also a federal entity. Um,
Of
so
course.
the existence of NOAA costs the US taxpayer about $4 a year and saves the US taxpayer about $300 a year.
Go
Right?
figure.
It Go
Saving
figure.
money.
It is it funds itself, right? It funds
Right.
itself in the National Weather Service's mission is preservation of life and property. These are the people who issue us tornado warnings and hurricane forecasts and tell you when
Yeah.
evacuation is appropriate. They issue fire warnings, right? So it's not just like, is it going to rain on Tuesday, but all of these uh really important and life-saving things, right? So those are
Amazing
and
stuff.
I know a lot of people who work for NOAA and who work for the National Weather Service, and a lot of them just lost their jobs,
Right.
which is wild because, again, of any of the federal agencies, right, the direct one-to-one cost to savings, right, is, again, it costs the American taxpayer $4 a piece and it saves you $300 a year.
Yeah, and that's kind of crazy.
Yeah. So like it's not where the fraud is, bro. And our understanding of climate change, right, and how that affects. So, for example, right, UCAR, the University Center for Atmospheric Research. There we go. Which is associated with the University of Colorado at Boulder.
Right.
They run the US's climate model, right? And so that's called the CESM, the community. Oh my gosh, uh, community Earth system model. It's free and open source, right? Like so it's available to researchers, to hobbyists, right? Anybody can grab the US's climate model.
Right.
And why do we have a climate model? Why is that important? Excellent question. I would love to tell you, right? So predicting
Why am I even here?
what the future holds for. Listen, I've given this talk a few times. It's often in the shower, right? Like, this is often what I yell at my shampoo bottle. um um so forecasting, like knowing how the weather will change over the next, say, like 50 years because of a
Right.
warming climate, is very hard to do. But we know things like California will become more prone to wildfires, and it's, as we're seeing now, right, we're seeing flooding in California. So that's also forecasted and predicted by our climate models, right? Understanding
Yeah.
how the frequency and intensity of tornadoes will change, and will their path change, right?
Right.
Because now it's fairly common to get tornadoes in, say, like the Northeast, especially like New Jersey. That was not common 30 years ago, right?
Right.
And so folks in New Jersey, right, and in the US Southeast, right, they don't have the same infrastructure and education surrounding tornadoes and what to do. And so they
Right.
don't have things like public shelters, right? And again, they don't have the education on, hey, don't be in your car during a tornado. That's a bad thing to do.
Right.
Um, and so like we need that like
It's like how
education
Canada
and
wouldn't be
yeah.
prepared for an earthquake. Like we're not. It's
No.
not some. We're not
Yeah.
on a fault line. Toronto is likely never going to experience any meaningful level of
Yeah.
tremor unless we get tremors, which that could be cool.
Yeah.
But like it's just
Yeah.
not a
Yeah.
thing that we're prepared for because it's just not something we deal with. It would likely
Right.
be
And
similar to what we deal with when it
Mhm.
comes to tornadoes or hurricanes or bad thunderstorms where it's like, hey, get to this type of a place, but that would just be
yeah.
luck.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so like for example, down in the U.S. Southeast, especially along the Gulf Coast, all their infrastructure is designed to survive hurricane force winds and flooding, which is great because that's the most common thing they deal with. But they also get tornadoes, right? And so building your house 17 feet up off the ground is great to prevent flooding, but bad for a tornado,
Right.
right? And so like you wouldn't want to shelter in place there, right?
Right.
Um, Also, right, speaking of hurricanes, so climate models suggest that the frequency of hurricanes is going up and will continue to go up with the warming planet. And so the same relative percentage of hurricanes will still be the like Cat 3, Cat 4, Cat 5, but since
Right.
there's more overall, we'll see more of those Cat 4, Cat 5s making landfall because there's just more hurricanes overall. That also means a larger probability of those hurricanes making what's called the extratropical transition, that's like Hurricane Sandy. When Hurricane Sandy affected New York, that hurricane underwent an extratropical transition. It went out of the tropic latitudes and into the mid latitudes, and affected, New York, New Jersey, very heavily. So things like that are suggested to be more common.
One
I
of the
remember with
things.
yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say with the LA fires, I made a comment on socials that was like, "This is what climate change is," and someone very sarcastically replied, just like, climate change, these fires were started by blots. Like, that's not the point. Climate change can't light a match, but it can create conditions that are incredibly conducive for wildfires. So
Right.
Australia is going to continue to see more wildfires. California is going to continue to see more wildfires. And that matters, right? There's huge human cost,
Yeah.
right? Just like the loss of all of that property, right? That's a terrible thing. And
Property,
we could be doing
lives,
more to manage it.
damage, money,
Exactly.
etc., etc., etc. Yeah.
That's why the mission of the National Weather Service is preservation of life and property. Don't cut it. Jeez. It's a
Don't do
good
it.
mission.
Don't
Don't.
stop.
Again, it pays for itself. What is happening?
For anybody who doesn't know, Maddie has been on before, and I do believe it was before you got your doctorate.
Yes.
You had come on and we had talked
I went
about
into a dark hole writing my dissertation.
disappeared off the face of the planet.
Yeah.
And she had been on, and it was right around the time of the fires in Montreal, in the Quebec fires that have been going on that summer, and there likely will be more. And we talked about what politics were doing when it came to cutting the budget and such. And there's also another one that happened this past year. There was the big one out in Alberta, and one of the conclusions that we came to is that, guess what? We do not care what your political alignment is, whether you're conservative, whether you're liberal, yada yada, whatever you identify as, is irrelevant, because what you ought to do is you ought to vote in your best interest and just vote for whoever is going to protect you and your property. Whether they deny climate change or not is not really that important. Whether or not they're going to put in policies that are going to protect you from the tornado that is happening, or the fire that is happening, or the earthquake that is happening, is what really matters, and where you should consider casting your vote. And yet here we are in the year of our Lord 2025, where are you okay?
Me?
Yeah.
No. I am fidgeting with this hair tie. I'm trying to cut all the twisted hair on it because I need something to fidget with to channel my rage.
Poor America. I don't blame you for feeling that way. It's pretty yikes.
And I live in the reddest state in the union.
Oh no.
So I can't decide if that means literally nothing's changing around here.
Oh, fair. Yeah.
Right? Or worse, I can't tell.
I mean, I get the vibe that, like, the feelings of the people around aren't gonna change, but until, like, those budget cuts start affecting the stuff that you get, because the red states tend to take tax money from the blue states. Well, I guess a little off topic, but so tell me about where do you think, given the current political climate, and the world political climate, because I think this is gonna have, like, very, very... This could have, like, a really positive effect, maybe, because it could force the
Maybe.
rest of the world to be like, all right, well, we're just going to drag you kicking and screaming, or you're going to keep doing
Yeah.
damage and we're all just going to triple our efforts to
Yeah.
mitigate the damage that is being done. But what do you think? Where do you think climate change is at in terms
Yeah.
of like damage and people, and where do you think what are your projections, do you think?
Okay. So, one of the really wonderful things about the global field of meteorology is there's a World Meteorological Association that is part of the UN, right? And there's some agreements through that such that all countries in the world freely share their meteorological data with each other, right? And that's because, right? Hey, the weather in California depends on what was going on in Japan and China 3 days ago, right? And so um, um, so there is that like philosophy pretty built into the scientific world of meteorology and atmospheric science
Right,
generally.
yeah, the way the
So,
scientists are viewing it, and the people who ought
mhm,
to be the ones having a very large voice in who the politicians are going to be listening to make decisions. Should,
exactly.
ought
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. So, second, climate models take an insane amount of computing power. So there are several different models, but they're sort of big ones. Like the U.S. has one, Europe has theirs. I know China has theirs. I think Russia has their own. Right? There's a few. There's a few scattered around. So um if let's say all of the US's like climate models shut down, right? Like one, the fact that they're already open source, right, means that individuals have that stuff downloaded, right? So it would be very difficult for the all of the US's like contributions to the science to just completely disappear even if NOAA shut down tomorrow, right? Um
There just wouldn't be as
so
much. It wouldn't be as easy to collect data moving forward, but the data that's there is there, period. There's nothing else to really do about it.
exactly. And so policy wise, like, okay, European countries, generally speaking, are making a really good push to being not only carbon neutral, but carbon negative. And that was the US's like 30-year goal as of a couple years ago, right? To within the next 30 years be not only carbon neutral, but carbon negative, to um offset emissions by other countries who like aren't playing ball globally, right?
And even some, I would say, like for China, for example, who is,
Yeah.
they say they're putting an effort forward, but it's going to take them a lot longer to get down. So, like,
Yeah.
even if they are playing ball and playing ball fairly and aren't being underhanded, which
Yeah.
maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I'm not here to
I,
judge right
I
now. If there's
I'm not a politician.
Yeah, if
I'm a scientist.
if
I
they're
don't know.
saying that they are and they are taking steps and it takes them longer to get
Yeah.
those steps, offsetting that by with countries who are already at that point is a good
Right.
thing to do. For example, there's a conversation floating around where there was an
Mhm.
inquiry about the pipeline, the oil pipeline in Canada, and it was Pierre
Mhm.
Poilievre, the conservative leader of Canada,
Okay.
who nobody fucking likes, talking to and asking questions to Mark Carney, who is likely to
Okay.
be the new Liberal Party leader, so
Okay.
he'll be the new prime minister for a little while until the next
Okay.
election, which is this
Yeah.
year.
Okay.
He was explaining how Pierre Poilievre asked him a good question, and the question was,
Yeah.
"Hey, why shouldn't Canada have a pipeline and you're saying that Canada shouldn't have a pipeline, but your company is investing in pipelines in other places?" And Carney is
It's a good
sitting
question.
there trying to answer the question by saying, Canada's not in a place where it needs this pipeline. We need to be expanding into other options. These countries need to stabilize, and them having easier access will actually reduce their emissions instead of having it go up. Well, they
Yeah.
then, once they're stabilized, then they'll be able to make the transition. Of course, Pierre Poilievre was a dick about it and didn't let him answer the question
Yeah.
properly, but alas, that was the answer. So, do you think that's an acceptable
Yeah.
answer?
I do think that's an acceptable answer because like let's look at like the global south, right? So
Mhm.
southern hemisphere, right? That's where we're seeing the largest like population growth, right? And we also see a lot of Like we want to see like
Yep.
technological development. I would say for a lot of like underdeveloped countries, um those are like, where is the greater human cost, right? And there's a great human suffering in not having access to electricity, right?
Right.
Because if you don't have electricity, you don't have refrigeration for vaccines, you don't have medical care, right? Like, so
Heating,
for
cooling, food.
exactly, yes, preservation of food.
Yeah.
And so like the goals of the like developed countries regarding power are going to be different, right, than the goals of developing nations, right? And
Right.
I'm very much speaking outside my field here,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And so this is Maddie's opinion, but not like, this is not a place you should consider me an expert, right? um uh Primary goal is going to be like reduction of human suffering, and it's also those same places that have the least resources that will be hit the most and affected the most by climate change, right?
Right.
And so like um if renewables aren't feasible or are too expensive or aren't going to happen fast enough,
Right.
right, in certain places, then like yeah, like get like, I don't see anything wrong in like transitioning off of oil,
Well, put
right?
it this way. You're
Um,
as a climate
yeah,
scientist, do you think it is
yeah.
reasonable to invest in higher emissions energy in some places while reducing it in others to offset that usage?
Under the right circumstances, yes,
Do
right?
you think
Um,
that it is reasonable to say something along the lines of, um, we, you're not somebody who's like, we should never use like gas ever for anything.
no, because I guess that's just because that just doesn't sound feasible, right?
Sure.
That sounds so unrealistic. Um, and listen, if we can, like, a lot of the damage, like we're seeing it, right? There is nothing we can do that's going to stop climate change in its tracks tomorrow,
Right.
right? Um, there are things that we can do to slow it, right? Currently, we're still pumping CO2, right? We're still adding, right? We're not adding as fast as the worst case scenario, right? Um, and if we can again get to carbon net neutral, right? Um, or develop technologies to like remove carbon from the oceans to allow ocean reuptake, right?
Lots and lots
Okay,
of algae.
yeah, lots of algae. So
Algae.
okay, so fundamentally the problem is that we as humans are adding CO2 to the atmosphere faster than the natural systems can remove it, right?
Think of it like if you've ever done aquascaping. You got too much nitrate in your
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And so
You're
if
gonna
we
kill all
had
your fish.
technology, yeah. Listen, if we had technology to if we had a giant CO sink, right, in
Yeah.
somewhere that was going to absorb carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere
Filter it,
and
yeah.
put it in Siberia, right? Or put it in like the northern. Listen, okay, imagine for a minute a magic giant pool in the northernmost reaches of Canada that just pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, right? If that existed, right, then sure, pump all you want. You know what I mean? Like, because we're gonna
Right,
go
yeah,
net
sure,
negative.
pump it. We're dumping it. It's getting pump and dumped. It's fine.
Right. So, so, um, uh so I think developing net carbon negative technologies in the countries that can afford it, right, is great.
Right.
I don't think there's any green there's no way of going like carbon neutral without nuclear power. I'm very pro nuclear power. I know a lot of people in the like green movement are anti nuclear power, and I find that baffling. It's the
Hmm.
cleanest, least dangerous power source that exists, most efficient, right?
Anybody curious about nuclear? We talked about that recently with two people who
cool.
do nuclear. So you should go listen to what they have to say and leave a comment there.
Yeah.
They're definitely around answering questions.
Yeah, France. Oh my gosh, France is nuclear. France is almost 100% nuclear.
That was a question that came up. They were talking about France. Yeah.
France is, do what France is doing. They have breeder reactors, so they reuse their fuel, right? Like, oh, it's amazing, right? That technology is illegal in the US, but
yeah, we talked about that too.
yeah, but so like developing nuclear power, would love to see, you know, like the biggest uranium mines are in Africa. Would love to see Africa nuclear.
Yeah,
you know?
Canada has tons of uranium, like very high quality uranium, from my understanding, and we could definitely do more with it.
Guys...
We've also got a ton of renewable. We do so much of our energy in Canada comes from water.
Yeah,
hydro.
Canada uses these really cool reactors called CANDU reactors. They're Canadian deuterium reactors, so they
match with our fucking monopoly money.
Yeah, listen.
And do.
There's your monopoly money, but also they use unrefined uranium. They just dig uranium up out of the dirt and use that. Every other type of uranium reactor uses refined uranium, right? Which is the concern, right? Because if you can refine uranium enough to make a reactor, you can refine uranium enough to make other things, right?
And if you're refining uranium, you're using more energy as well.
True, but unrefined uranium can be used if you use deuterium, heavy water, as your coolant, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's super cool.
Anyway,
sorry, climate. Back to climate.
What do you think the biggest threat right now to climate is? Do you think it's car emissions? Do you think it's overfishing?
Approximately 10 companies are responsible for greater than 75% of all emissions.
That sounds like it's an easy problem to solve then.
Yeah. Those 10 companies.
Great. So what would you recommend?
Okay, so one of the biggest things is going to be how we transport things, right?
Okay.
So if we're in the US and we are getting, I don't know, food shipped from Africa, right? Like fruit or whatever have you.
Right.
Not great, right? And so shifting to more local economies, right? For consumables, right? Like obviously, listen, we live in a big world. It's a global economy, but like a lot of our everyday items, if those were coming more locally, would be great. To like, man, the US should have trains, right?
Trains would be good. Canada actually just announced that the Trudeau announced that on his way out the door, announced that they're setting up a train from Montreal to Toronto, which is huge. That's a very big deal for anybody who's from Canada. You know how big of a deal that is. Chat is asking, what are the name of these companies? What are the names? You got names?
I don't know that off the top of my head. And I could be wrong on that 75% number. But it's like the vast majority of all emissions come from these like 10 companies.
I'll see if I can get that for you and leave it in the description down below.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. So so there's kind of two things, right? Because there is the like global perspective, then there's also the local perspective, right? Because a lot of times people what they really want to know is, what can I do as an individual to like combat climate change? Sure. And the first thing I'm going to say is that is not the best mindset to have, right? Because the push to climate change being fundamentally the individual's responsibility, right? That being the way we perceive it, right? I'm a good citizen combating climate change if I like bike to work and recycle and turn the water off when I brush my teeth, like Barney taught me to. Then I'm doing my part to combat climate change. That mindset is largely the result of PR campaigns following like the BP oil spill.
Propaganda.
Right? It's propaganda. propaganda. There is nothing I as an individual can do that would be a drop in the bucket, right?
Right.
Compared to what just BP could do, right?
Right.
Right? And so don't let companies and corporations push the responsibility onto the individual, right? Be a good citizen. Advocate for like local water conservation. That is a good thing to do, right? But that's like ecology, that's not climate, right?
Right.
Um the responsibility belongs on these like the large corporations, especially like oil and gas companies, um big manufacturing plants, right, and on governments, right, for where they're investing their resources.
And the
So
government's
resist
control over those and imposing regulations onto those things. So what you're telling me is get involved on a local political level to push harder on regulations in your local level, to then push harder in your district, to then push harder in your riding, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's a
yeah,
grassroots domino effect.
right. So there can be that grassroots domino effect, but again, don't let that propaganda win, right? The thing that's going to solve climate change is not every human on planet Earth recycling, right? We can recycle and separate our recycling all we like, and it will do nothing if there is
Right.
no change at those corporate levels.
Well, how do you think? What do you think about the meat industry, though? Because I do know that like methane and the meat industry, particularly in America, can be a really big problem. Is there something reasonable to say that, hey, if you and your friends can push past that, you need to have milk and you need to have meat for every meal, and like society shifts its idea? Do you think that would help?
I think there's something to that. Yeah. So methane, which is the gas we're talking about, is
Yep.
actually a it's about 100 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than CO2. So smaller changes in methane have a larger effect on global climate than CO2, right? Does that make sense? There's actually a video
That makes sense
about
to me.
that.
Yes.
Okay, there's a video about that on Science Side Up. I do a whole climate dynamics series, and there's a I forget what it's
Her
called, but
channel
it's
is
in
linked
the
down below,
yeah.
but if you want, I can also try to remember to grab that link as well. If you want to send it to me after this is over.
Yeah, it's in there
Um,
somewhere. You'll find it. So I like, um, I'm not, I'm not anti-meat, right? I'm a
yeah,
meat
it's
and
not
potatoes
about
kind of
being
girl.
anti-meat. It's just about changing the idea a little bit that
Yeah,
you don't need to listen to the propaganda of the dairy company trying to sell you more dairy products. You don't have to
yeah,
listen to the
but
meat companies trying to
yeah,
sell you more, telling you that it's perfect and good for your diet. Treat them like
yeah,
they're the fucking Kellogg's. This is part of a
yeah,
good breakfast. No, it's not.
yeah, yeah. Like I do actually like if like I do think that like if we had a like meatless Monday push, right?
Sure.
Um, right, like replacing one meal a week with like a vegetarian option, I think would do a lot, right? I think that would, because again, methane, you could have a much smaller change in the methane output has a much bigger effect. So if
Right.
you reduce the amount of methane from livestock by a small amount, right,
Right.
can have a big effect on the climate, right? So like grassroots movement of the like meatless Monday, right? That is something that I think
Well,
is a
it
reasonable
forces
thing.
those larger companies that are producing all of this meat to have to change their strategies a little bit in a way that is generally better for everybody involved and not just their bottom line. But it will help
Yeah.
their bottom line because you're telling them, I'm not buying your shit unless you change it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And also so inside of that is listen, which is the bigger deal if I ate meat from say a cow that was butchered on a local farm versus eating lentils that were manufactured in India and shipped over. What's the net climate difference in that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Right? That's
Right.
getting down into there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, right? Um right, like the systems are
Fair.
big and tangled.
Well, I
And
think at
I'm
that
just
point you're
one little
looking at it too
scientist.
much on an individual level to actually have any
Yeah.
real effect in the first place anyway. So it doesn't really matter.
Yes. Yeah.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
wherever you can, shop local, right? Wherever you can, um
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, things like that.
I think shopping locally is actually a really big deal. I think like if you're
Yeah.
somebody who has a backyard, somebody who can produce an amount of food for like a
Mhm.
reasonable cost, even just doing that and sharing it with your neighbors. If you've got an apple tree in your yard, you've probably got a dickload of apples. If nobody on your street has to buy apples, that's helpful.
Yeah, it's actually nice. Out here, it's pretty common to do like local farms offer farm shares. So during like the growing season through the
Yes.
summer and spring, you can do like, oh hey, I want a quarter share, and you get produce directly
And
from
you get
that
to
local
like be
farm,
part of a
which is
group that's all involved and you can make friends and you can
hmm
touch some fucking grass, you know what I mean?
yeah,
It's that
yeah.
whole
Order your
people
farm share.
people want to like get off of the internet. People want to get out of like feeling stuck and in these things and want to do
Yeah,
things and then they just don't know what to do. Try that. Try
yeah.
go make some friends.
Did you know that uh okay, here I'm going to describe the effects of a simple action, and then I'm going to tell you what the simple action is.
Oh god.
In urban areas, if you
Mhm.
do this this one trick people don't want you to know about,
Uh-huh.
if you do this one trick, you will lower the effects of urban heat islands, right? So cities are
Oh.
hotter than rural areas.
Yes.
You will lower crime. You will lower the rates of things like diabetes and even cancer. So people's overall health indicators increase. Um, and it
Huh.
actually effectively has a measurable effect on reducing poverty. What
All
is this
right,
one
chat.
crazy trick?
Guess. Before you say anything, give them a minute. Got chat?
Okay.
You get like a minute to guess. I'm going to count you down.
Yeah.
What is the crazy trick?
Planting trees inside of cities.
Oh, that makes sense. Like, that's
Yeah.
a thing here. We do that.
Yeah. We don't is the thing. But yeah, if you go to play, especially, and so this gets back into all kind how everything is intertwined, right? And the same terrible bubble. Uh Typically the neighborhoods that have the least amount of like green space in cities are neighborhoods that are predominantly people of color, right? And so there's also so like planting trees, having green things in those areas,
Yeah.
right, does a ton for just on a public health side, and it also reduces some of the negative impacts of like again urban heat islands. Right.
I need to take you. There's a city that's I used to live in, and
Mhm.
you got to come up and visit sometime. And I will show you this
I
city because you will
do.
fall in love with it. The city's name is Guelph, and if you Google
Okay.
Maps them, you will see that they're very green because the whole place is the university there specializes in agriculture. So
Oh, that's awesome.
there's a park and a path that runs through almost the entire city that you can just walk, and it is just
Ugh,
greenery. Um,
that's beautiful.
Absolutely recommend. It's a great city. Some of its stuff in its layout are a little bit of a mistake. There's a couple of things
Mhm.
that need work, like anywhere else. But tell me a little bit more about you, because you said locally. How do you feel
Yeah.
about city planning and city layouts that are about smaller local areas as part of a larger city that are kind of intertwined with each other?
I mean, that sounds like a dream to live in. In terms of what I would like, or in terms of like, um, okay, let me back up. So, if we're thinking about atmosphere and climate things that we care about a lot inside of cities,
Yeah.
um, cities have this tendency to trap pollution on top of them, right? So they emit pollution and it stays put, right? Um, so what you want is that like cities are going to emit more things, right? Just more particles go into the air in a city than in a rural area,
Sure.
right? That's just there's more people, more air conditioners, right? There's just more things.
Think of it like
Um
methanes. There's more
yeah,
methane there.
there's more methane there. And
People be
so
farting.
yeah, and so you can do things to like design cities to allow better airflow, right? To have more plants, right? Because plants are super good at taking particles out. They're really good filters. There's actually a really cool technology that puts algae basically
I was gonna
in
ask you about the algae thing. That algae
the
walls.
algae thing. Algae walls.
Those
Yeah,
things are
algae
so
walls are
fucking
great.
cool. I want one.
Algae is so good at filtering, right?
Yes.
Like, get you some algae walls.
You can
and
eat
again,
it too.
that's amazing, right? But like yeah, so like part of urban planning should include green spaces that will help with the local removal of pollution, right?
It helps make you feel
Um
better too.
it helps make you feel better. Um it's going to help. So if we're thinking locally, think anything in terms of climate, right? Locally, think about policies that will lead to cleaner air and cleaner water for your local region, right? Arguably, if everyone did that in their local regions everywhere, we would that would lead to net fewer emissions, net fewer
Right.
greenhouse emissions, right? And so if you want to think like grassroots, local, individualistic, what are things we can do? That's a great thing. Think about locally air and water quality, right?
Right.
And that is the thing. If everyone was concerned with that, that would have a global effect on climate.
Right.
So like, hey, fund the EPA. Re- require chemical companies to clean up after themselves, right? That's a cost of doing that business.
Right.
They're incredibly profitable. They can afford it.
Right.
There's a town here in Oklahoma that's not super far from here that is the ground is completely poisoned, right? Because
Oh,
of a
good.
bankrupt chemical company. That
Good.
yeah. Anyway, cringe, hate it.
That sounds pretty beta.
Flint still doesn't have clean water,
Yeah,
right?
Flint,
Like,
Michigan.
these are problems. Ooh, there's places around here where you can light your water on fire as it comes out of the faucet because of the natural gas.
What the fuck is wrong with your country? All right, we've been live for about 42 minutes. We are going to start moving into our Q&A session, so if you do have questions for Dr. Maddie, make sure you get your questions in now. If you're watching this from the future, too bad you missed the Q&A. You're going to have to find a way to see it later. If we get to enough subscribers and this gets monetized, Q&As will start becoming available for members. So make sure to like and share and subscribe and go and follow Maddie at her socials down below. I will make sure to add those additional lists. Maddie, do you have anything you want to shield before we flip over?
Yeah, I do. I've just started a new channel. It's a TTRPG actual play channel. Because I need a cozy break from reality. So it's called OK Roll. It is a cozy break from reality channel. We do a once a month live stream. We did our first one this month, so it's just about a week and a half ago. And we'll release like filmed and edited TTRPG content about once a quarter. We're not playing D&D. We're kind of exploring other games and trying to tell other stories, and give me the break from reality that I need, and hopefully I can share that with you all. So OK Roll is the channel. Would love to see you guys over there.
I'll make sure that gets linked down below as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will be right back after the break. Don't go anywhere, and we'll see you on the other side.